seas, the strings are pulled and away. The Chancellor says we've brought Britain back from the brink of bankruptcy. Well, perhaps the Chancellor will confirm three facts. Fact one, when the global crisis hit, the UK had the second lowest debt of any G7 country. Fact number two, that the last government inherited a debt interest level of 10p in every pound of tax received, and that even after a world recession, we bequeathed a figure 15% lower. Fact three, that the interest rates that the UK pays on its debt have been falling since the beginning of the year, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps the Chancellor, in the interest of accuracy, can confirm those statistics. And when the last CSR took place, Mr. Speaker, in 2007, the Right Honourable Member was the Shadow Chancellor. 2007. Was he calling for reduced public spending? Read the hand side. Was he calling for regulation of the banking industry? Two things about 2007. First of all, I read the Right Honourable Member's contribution. Indeed, instead of arguing for reduced public spending, he argued that we were spending too little. In 2007, he complained that we were slowing the growth in health and education expenditure. Indeed, his party supported every penny of our spending plans until well after the collapse of Lehman Brothers in America, which set off the disastrous chain reaction that caused the global recession. And in 2007, far from calling for regulation of the banks, they were calling for deregulation of the banks. The Right Honourable Member for Wokingham had produced a report on behalf of the Prime Minister, of the Leader of the Opposition at the time, who had called for greater regulation of the banking industry. So we need to get the facts right, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor described his emergency budget in June as being unavoidable and fair. We know, Mr. Speaker, that it was unfair because the IFS produced the statistics with devastating and forensic accuracy a few hours later. And we also know that it was avoidable. The deficit has to be paid down, Mr. Speaker. Here they go again. The chief whip's spreadsheet telling them when to stand up and what to say. Where is he? There he is. The chief whip doesn't have to move to have influence on his backbenchers. So we do need to bring the deficit down. Mr. Speaker, today's reckless gamble with people's livelihoods runs the risk of stifling the fragile recovery. The ridiculous analogy of credit card debts insults the intelligence of the British public. If countries around the world hadn't run up debts, that's what the fiscal deficit is, by the way. If they hadn't run up debts to sustain their economies, people would have not lost their credit cards, they'd have lost their jobs, they'd have lost their houses, and they would have lost their savings. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Democrats know this. They argued this when seeking the support of the electorate. The Deputy Prime Minister argued this. Then he discovered Greece. In the period between the ballot box closing and his ministerial car door opening, the Deputy Prime Minister discovered a different approach to this. So like us, the Liberal Democrats, every single one of them elected this House on a platform that in the context of reducing the deficit, speed kills. The Chancellor repeats a list of those that support his swift cuts. He mentions all the time, he made a long list. He left out, incidentally, he curiously failed to mention the other countries in the United Kingdom, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, who do not support these measures. Perhaps that's why he calls himself a one-nation Tory. But here's another supportive quote, Mr. Speaker. Here's another supportive quote that he missed out. You can take this down and use it in future briefings. The measures we have taken have been commended by international bodies such as the European Central Bank, the European Commission, the IMF and the OECD. They have also won the approval of the international markets. That was the Irish Minister of Finance last December. When he told the Irish Parliament that his austerity plan means that they've turned the corner, and 4 months later they slid back into recession. Mr. Speaker, the concerns of those watching this announcement today won't be on the misrepresentation of figures and the clever Punch and Judy stuff that we all engage in, including myself at times. They will be interested in whether they'll stay at work, whether they'll stay in their homes, whether they'll stay safe on the streets. We're told that the expected job losses from this spending review, and the Chancellor confirmed it, are around 490,000. PricewaterhouseCoopers reported last week that 1 million jobs are at stake because the impact on the private sector is just as severe. Isn't it the case that at the same time as they are throwing people out of work, the government is reducing the support to help people return to the workplace? I applaud the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions in his ideas and his efforts to do what we were seeking to do, which is to make work pay. The Right Honourable Member often pays credit to what we did when we were in government. The fact is, though, with the proposals today, they have actually made it harder for people to return to work because of the changes in working tax credit, because of the changes they've made to support for working parents, because of the huge increase in fares for those who have to travel to get a job. So this whole point, I'm afraid, the Work and Pensions Secretary has had his job made harder by today's announcement. On housing, the Chancellor has announced the retreat of central government from any role in building new affordable homes. I asked the Chancellor, can he tell the House how many jobs will be lost in the construction sector as a result of his decision to end all but end capital funding for house building? And on crime, which has fallen dramatically after the last 13 years, I heard what the Chancellor said about the HMIC report. But the Home Office is not a protected department. Dealing with counter-terrorism and policing, it seems to me that the public will be worried that they'll lose more police on their streets. Mr. Speaker, as I said, spending does have to be reduced, but the frontline services... Spending does have to be reduced, but the frontline services on which people rely must be protected. We support moves to ring-fence the health budget. We support moves says the party opposite. The point about the health service isn't having their budgets protected, it's taking £2 to £3 billion out of that budget to pay for a top-down structural reorganisation that the party opposite told the public in their manifesto would not happen. This is the top-down reorganisation to end all top-down reorganisations. And we're already seeing the loss of jobs in the National Health Service as a result of this. And on education, the Right Honourable Member, the Chancellor, mentioned that the pupil premium is going to be funded. There are stories already out there about teachers and teaching assistants losing their jobs as a result of today's announcement. We're going to have to look at these statistics very carefully. We're going to have to look at the small print before we can see what's happening on education. The Chancellor said that they will keep a version of education maintenance allowance. That's very good. It's been the single biggest contributor to lifting the number of children from poorer homes that stay in education. It was introduced by a Labour government. He's told us that there'll be some changes, that it will be introduced in some form, but he doesn't say how. Neither does he say on removing ring fences what effect that will have on Sure Start, because Sure Start is